Hello and welcome to the Automotive Anecdotes podcast, a podcast that's normally to have a chat about all those things that your friends would rather you didn't do with them. But this one's a little bit different, and actually there is may prick up about something that's going to affect everybody in the future. Some things remain completely the same. I am one of your hosts. My name is Martin, at Bob Clayton 92 at Twitter. And of course, joining me, as always, is your other co-host,
John, so at John MSM on all social media platforms.
Well, John, it's great to be back here. I've got the Christmas tree up. I feel festive
You can see.
as we sit here in Christmas week. I suppose really the best place to start here is probably if I shall I give a brief overview of why we've decided to all get together in Christmas week to have a discussion?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Brill. Well, look, we need to have a chat. We need to have a chat about the future because just recently, in fact, on the 3rd of December, the Prime Minister released a press release that, believe it or not, wasn't COVID related, but was actually climate related. So the UK has set ambitious new climate targets ahead of the UN summit, and the new plan aims for at least a 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade compared to 1990 levels. Now, to do that, he's announced an ambitious new emissions target for net zero by 2050. The aim being that will lead the way in tackling climate change globally. Now, to do that, he has set some rules with regards to petrol vehicles, diesel vehicles by 2030 and hybrid vehicles by 2035. Perhaps, John, do you want to go into a bit more detail about that?
Yeah, so the legislation essentially says they intend to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, or ICEs as they're known, in their entirety by 2030. So that's any vehicle that is entirely powered by a petrol or diesel engine. That doesn't include hybrids, where there's a reasonable range that can be done on full electric. They have a few more years. They've got a 5-year sunset after that, which is 2035. But from that point onwards, only vehicles with sort of net zero emissions will be allowed to be sold in the UK. So you will not be able to buy a petrol or a diesel car for your commute.
And it's worth saying that that target has been brought forward by 15 years. That was 2050 initially, wasn't
Correct.
it? So we're now in a position where 15 years, you think back, 2005 was 15 years ago, and I'm sure most people listening can remember what they were doing in 2005, this side of the millennium. It's not that far away. Bearing in mind, we've had 1/15 of that this year, and nobody knows what they've done in this year. So it's
Absolutely.
it's going to come knocking on our door. But that sort of led us to thinking, well, maybe we need to have a talk about the alternatives, because I think it's fair to say, John, that there's been a lot in the press about electric vehicles, and obviously electric vehicles, Tesla in particular, have sort of come to the fore, as have more affordable models like Renault and Nissan. But is that the only option we have?
Well, that's a great question. And that's really the purpose of doing this podcast, is to start to talk about what are the options, what does the future look like, and maybe hopefully with the discussions we're going to have, we can allay some fears people might have about what potentially could be a very rapid change in the automotive industry, which might have knock-on effects for not just what we drive every day, but the things we do for fun. So motorsport, exotic cars, classic cars, all those sorts of things we like to get involved with. So the hope is that we can talk through that and try and get a vision for what the future might look like.
Of course, and we better add the caveat there that just in case people are suddenly panicking as listening to this, what about vehicles bought before that date? Are they banned?
So it's a good question. No, not currently. The idea is the ban is on sales of new vehicles. It doesn't stop you buying, selling, or maintaining your existing vehicle. It just means you can't buy a brand new diesel or petrol powered car from that date forward.
Okay, that'd be interesting. And actually, one thing that we haven't seen in any of the literature anywhere is whether going forward you'll be able to import vehicles from other countries that perhaps are a little bit behind. I don't know whether you know anything about that.
It's a good question. I don't know, but maybe the panel will, which will allude to what we need to say next.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we are joined by, or will be joined by, some specialists now. They are due to come and join us for 3 special episodes where we will look at all of those in depth. But we thought, well, we're not the right people to do that because, as you know, John, probably best that you talk about your specialist subject, if you like, because I think it's fair to say that you definitely have a belief down one route. So we needed to bring in some specialists to talk about the others.
Absolutely. So I think there's 3 kind of technologies that look like they might be the face of the future of motoring. One is clearly electric vehicles or battery electric vehicles, BEVs, whatever you wish to call them. The other is hydrogen, which seems to be having a resurgence. There's lots to talk about the hydrogen economy. So we have somebody along who's going to talk about hydrogen. And the other is synthetic fuels. So something that I've got quite an interest in, which is basically making replacement for fossil fuels that are net zero. So they can continue to use them without any net emissions, but something that can be retrofitted to existing vehicles.
Now, are you saying that just because you don't want to get rid of your existing vehicles?
Absolutely.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Can't say fairer than that. So the plan is over the next 3 sort of shorter episodes than you're used to with the Automotive Anecdotes podcast, we just wanted to give you a little insight from each of those specialists in battery electric vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles, and net zero synthetic fuels for the current ICEs. And we will do that an episode at a time and then conclude with a discussion of where we actually think it's going to go, despite everyone's preferences. We will be joined, like I say, with specialists in each area. So John has very kindly taken on the net zero synthetic fuels. As you can probably tell if you've listened to an Automotive Anecdote podcast before, I am not taking on any specialism because I have none to give. So we are going to bring in some specialists. We will be joined by Bennett, a specialist in terms of hydrogen power vehicles, and of course Jess Shanahan as well, I think, is joining us, John, for the battery electric, a recent EV owner as well.
Absolutely.
And I'm pleased to say that we are now joined by our 2 extra panelists that are going to provide a little bit of specialist knowledge that I definitely don't have to give you today. So let's see who we've got.
So, good day, everybody. My name's Graham Bennett. I work for a company called DNVGL. We are an international technology advisory company. I actually head what we call the energy transition team for DNVGL, and specifically looking at the future of deep decarbonisation of industry and transport through the use of things like hydrogen and supported by carbon capture and storage where necessary. But today I'm here just to join in a private capacity. I'm not expressing the views of DNVGL. I'm sharing my own views as what my son-in-law John would call a petrol head. As somebody who
Absolutely
owns a Volvo V60 T5 with a tuning mod for day-to-day applications. Also the owner of an SLK 350, and also the proud owner of a BMW S1000 XR motorcycle. So clearly, currently in the combustion fueled environment, but recognizing that as we transition towards a lower carbon future, I will need to also be looking at lower carbon alternatives, and that may include battery electric vehicles or indeed hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So happy to join today and share my views on some of those topics.
Hi everyone, I'm Jess Shanahan. I'm an automotive journalist, but I'm I would say, I guess, a petrol head turned recent electric car owner. So I currently own a Renault Zoe EV, and still have my my combustion engine car, which is a Fiat 500 Abarth. Although I'm probably going to be selling that now because I don't have the need for 2 cars. I don't do a great deal of distance without a press car usually, so electric made sense for me. I also did a 2,500 mile road trip in an electric car a couple of years back as well, which kind of just made me fall in love with the whole thing. But I work in motorsport. I love cars, and I think like everyone here, I would class myself as a petrol head still. But I think that comes more from the love of any car, despite how it's kind of fueled. I am a car enthusiast, and until recently, the best way of kind of describing yourself as such was to call yourself a petrol head. So I'm kind of straddling those lines there now.
There we go. You've all put your specialists on the table there nice and early, so that's good news. So we've got a hydrogen specialist, an electric specialist, and Jon, who is determined not to let go of the ICE permanently. Brill. Well, Jon, I know we said it just before we introduced our extra panelists on there, but it might be a question that'd be worth sort of asking around the table there. But obviously, I think it's important to recognise that one size will not fit all here. And looking into the future, the 2035, the 2030 regulations as well, it's probably going to mean different things for different people. The commuter, the enthusiast, that we spoke about whether vehicles are going to be penalised retrospectively. But perhaps, Graham, if I start with you there, just as a little overview, you're obviously, like you say, a petrol head at the moment. But going forward, how do you think it would affect you as sort of a commuter and an enthusiast if you split them into two?
I'm not sure you necessarily need to split them into two, Martin. I think motorsport has always been at the heart of innovation when it comes to developing new technologies, and that has fed from motorsport into normal vehicles. So you see the use of hybrids in F1. They've been there for a number of years. That technology, obviously perfected by people like Mercedes, has fed through into their road vehicle fleet. I think you look at the E-series, the various electronic series of racing, that as well has also fed into road car development to a substantial amount, to the point at which even organizations like Audi and BMW are now pulling out of the Formula E series because they're saying, well, it's now mainstream. We no longer need to have that as a test bed or as a development mule to develop new powertrains. So I think there's always been a crossover between the technology developments in Formula One and motorsport, and how that derives into road vehicles. So I don't necessarily see them challenged with that, in a sense. I think you will continue to see new developments in motorsport, whether that's in rally cars or whether that's in circuit race based vehicles that will benefit the road consumer at the end. But the challenge, I think, for the road consumer is going to be one of cost. Is how quickly can we get the cost of these developments down, so that the people who have to inherit the older internal combustion engines in the future, or even the first, second generation battery electric vehicles, are not disadvantaged by the fact that they're inheriting technologies which are perhaps more expensive to run or perhaps carry a higher tax burden. So I think that's the challenge rather than the technology challenge.
Okay. And Jess, I suppose when this was all announced, obviously we're making this essentially sort of 3 weeks after the targets were all brought forward on the 3rd of December by a considerable amount. And I said just before we introduced you both that most people can remember what they were doing in 2005. And that is the realistic, 2035 is 15 years away. Were you surprised when they brought it forward by that amount, based on particularly what Graham's saying there about the fact that technology has to essentially drip through to the mainstream, even if it's there in Formula One motorsport now?
Yeah, I think, it was rumored that it was coming for a long time. So I think a lot of people weren't that surprised. And I think, the government is increasingly under pressure to make these big steps. And I think having the pressure of such a close deadline, well, it feels really close, it is going to just kind of accelerate things. And the hope is that, with that deadline, there's going to be more investment in infrastructure. Technology is going to move quicker because now people have something that doesn't feel like the far-flung future to work towards.
Okay, no, understandable. Jon, anything you'd like to add there?
Not particularly. I think that's a really good summary, although I find it's a very interesting point that Graham made about how that technology will cascade down, and that we don't essentially push people at the bottom end of the motoring sort of spectrum out of the picture and make motoring very difficult to access, or certainly individual transport. Might not be such an issue in big cities, but when you're out in the country like we are, you can rely on a car, and we don't want to make it so expensive. And the different technologies coming in very rapidly might make that very difficult. I think there's a lot to think about when it comes to infrastructure. Obviously, we're seeing a large amount of investment in new charging infrastructure, and other technologies that might be on the cards may or may not need less or more infrastructure with them. And I'd kind of quite like to unpack in the later episodes maybe a little bit about how we think that might affect industry and how that might affect the consumer, because there's kind of two different ways that might go. If it's expensive for the consumer, it's going to exclude certain people. If it's expensive for industry, who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be the industry itself, in the hope that they're going to see it as an investment for the future, or they're going to be looking to the government to pay for those large sort of wholesale changes to infrastructure?
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a really good place, John, to say, well, we need to look in more detail at each one. So
absolutely.
Over the next 3 short episodes, you will hear our specialists, and I'm going to keep calling you specialists, put all the responsibility onto you three. You'll hear their views and hopefully some challenges as well. The whole point of us looking at them all in depth is that people like me that know very little about it all can ask questions that might relate to what members of the public would ask, and also perhaps we'll get questions from the rest of the panelists as well to the others, but we'll see. We'll try not to put anyone on the spot. So join us over the next 3 short podcast episodes where we'll look at all of them in depth. Well, thank you very much for your time on those discussions there. Hopefully it's been enlightening for you listening as well, but it just leaves me to say, Jess, a big thank you for your input on this one.
Thank you very much. It's been great to be here.
And Graham, thank you as well for joining us and taking time out of your schedule.
Thanks, Martin. I enjoyed taking part in the discussions.
Brilliant. And John, I'm sure we will be back. But thank you for co-hosting with me or taking your specialist role in this week's episode. And we will see you all very soon to continue the discussion.
Excellent. Goodbye.
Bye.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.